Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dni Podcast, the podcast where we dive deep into important topics affecting students today. I'm Paige, and I'm thrilled to be hosting this episode.
Hello, I'm Christian. Today we'll be talking about something that's so important for creating a healthy school environment. That is diversity and inclusion, grades 6 through 12.
Hi, I'm Ra. We're going to talk about how diversity and inclusion impact students' lives, both inside and outside the classroom, as well as how it affects their personal and academic growth.
And I'm Ryan. Together, we will explore some of the challenges schools face with diversity and inclusion, and more importantly, what steps can be taken to foster a more inclusive atmosphere for all students.
That's right. Diversity and inclusion are key to building a positive and supportive school environment. So, let's dive into it. Chris, when we talk about diversity and inclusion in schools, what does that really mean to you?
Oh, that's a great question, Paige. Diversity is about recognizing and celebrating differences among students, whether it's race, culture, socioeconomic background, gender identity, or disabilities. It's also about understanding that every student brings something unique to the table. Inclusion, on the other hand, goes beyond simply having diverse students in the school. It's about making sure all students feel valued, respected, and have equal access to opportunities.
I couldn't agree more. Exactly, Christian. And it's so crucial that schools do more than just recognize diversity. They need to actively create an environment where everyone feels welcome. Imagine being in a classroom where you're the only student from a different background or culture. It could be isolating. That's where inclusion becomes important, not just as allowing students to be a part of the group, but ensuring they feel like they truly belong.
Yeah, that's totally right, Ra. And when schools don't prioritize inclusion, it can lead to feelings of alienation, bullying, and even academic struggles. It's not just about social connection, but it also impacts students' mental health and their ability to focus and perform in school. So, making sure everyone feels included directly affects their overall success in education.
Absolutely. So, Rob, what do you think inclusion is particularly important in middle and high school?
Well, Paige, middle and high school are such pivotal times for students. It's when they're really discovering who they are and forming their sense of identity. If they're constantly feeling left out, judged, or ignored, it can affect their self-esteem and how they perform academically. On the flip side, when schools create inclusive spaces, students can build confidence, create strong relationships, and succeed both personally and academically. Being familiar with Open PE, it gives examples on how to make it inclusive classroom.
It's a good point, Ra. So now let's talk about how diversity and inclusion directly affects students. Ryan, do you have any examples of how this plays out in schools?
Yes, definitely. I actually went to a school that implemented a peer mentoring program where older students were paired with younger ones from different backgrounds. The goal was to encourage dialogue, understanding, and mutual support. It was amazing to see how it brought my classmates together. Students who would have never interacted with each other were learning from one another and sharing experiences. The impact made our school overall a more positive school culture. And more recently, there was a SHAPE conference that brought all diverse people together to share ideas about PE.
I love that example, Ryan. Programs like that show how important it is to connect students across differences. But on the other side of things, there are real challenges schools face with inclusion. Christian, what are some of those challenges?
It's a great point, Paige. One big challenge is unconscious bias. Whether it's teachers, students, or even parents, people sometimes carry biases they're not even aware of. These biases can affect how students are treated or who gets access to certain opportunities. For example, a teacher might unintentionally call on the same students over and over again, or might not provide the same level of support to students from underrepresented groups. These subtle biases can create barriers for students who are already facing challenges.
And let's not forget that schools may not always have the resources needed to implement full inclusion. For example, students with disabilities might not always have the appropriate accommodations in place. If the school doesn't have the proper resources or trained staff to support diverse learners, inclusion can quickly fall short.
When it comes to resources, whether it's training for teachers, accessible materials, or counseling services, they are key for making inclusion a reality. Without that support, it's difficult to create an environment where all students feel truly included.
Okay, so now that we've discussed the challenges, let's talk about solutions. What can schools do to improve diversity and inclusion, especially for middle and high school students?
Well, I'll talk about that. I think the first step is teacher training. Teachers should receive ongoing professional development on how to recognize and address unconscious biases, how to use inclusive language, and how to create a classroom where everyone feels supported. It's also important for teachers to have the tools to make accommodations for students with disabilities or those from marginalized groups. There's actually a resource called the UCSF Office of Diversity and Research that has unconscious bias training. This could help teachers train to catch themselves accidentally using unconscious bias in their classrooms.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more, Christian. And beyond teacher training, schools can create student-led initiatives, encouraging students to take an active role in promoting diversity and inclusion, which can be incredibly powerful. Whether it's through starting affinity groups, organizing cultural events, or even just encouraging conversations around diversity, students themselves can be a driving force for change.
I think those are all really good examples. I'm going to give another really effective solution, and that is to have structured support systems for students who might be feeling isolated. This could include peer mentorship programs, as I mentioned earlier, or creating safe spaces where students can talk about their experiences and get guidance. When students feel like they have a support system, they're more likely to thrive in school.
Exactly, and schools can also adapt their curriculum to reflect more diverse perspectives. This includes adding more authors, historical figures, and perspective from different cultures, races, and backgrounds. When students see themselves represented in the material they're learning, they're more likely to feel included.
It's also important to remember that students themselves also play a huge role in fostering inclusion. Rao, what can students do to make sure everyone feels like they belong?
Well, Christian, students can make a big difference by actively listening to each other and being open to learning from different experiences. If a student sees someone being left out or treated unfairly, they should feel empowered to step in and be an ally. Simple actions like inviting someone to join a group or just starting a conversation could go a long way in creating a more inclusive atmosphere.
Ra, I couldn't have put it any better myself. And students can also use their voices to push for more inclusion in school policies or activities. If something isn't working, students can advocate for change, whether it's addressing a lack of resources or suggesting more inclusive events. Change often starts with the people who are directly affected.
Yeah, and now let's talk about being on a sports team. Inclusion and diversity isn't just involved in PE or in education. Is there any specific things that you guys see when we were on sports teams in high school that could involve being left out or looked at differently because of your diversity or inclusion?
Yeah, 100%. I feel that when you play sports and if you're not a starter, sometimes when you're on the scout team, it can cause a problem and make you feel uncomfortable or make you feel bad.
Yeah, and I've also noticed that students with disabilities, they don't often get the same My bad, everybody. I got a little tongue twisted there. What I was going to say is that when we look at the inclusion part with students with disabilities on sports teams, they don't always have the same opportunities as able-bodied participants.
I 100% agree, Paige, and I feel that at Cortland, they've done a good job of teaching us to adapt with these situations and figure out ways to get students involved even when they're less capable and do as much as they can.
Well, yeah, even, I had Dr. Gilbert for Adapted. Obviously, she actually taught us a lot with having to include everyone, even showing us at Cortland at the back. If no one sees it, we do have a ramp for people who do need it, for people who are in wheelchairs, people who can't walk upstairs. We do have elevators in the building as well. And yeah, I feel like Cortland's just really they like having the inclusion part.
Yeah, and even in 356 with Beck and anyone else that I've had, like when you go into the SLC, you get in the pool, they have like the machine that lifts the people with the wheelchair into the pool and lifts them out. And there was a student who was awesome, and he loved being in the water. And for us to have that and be able to get him into the water and do something he loved shows how Cortland really teaches you to adapt to any situation.
Yeah, I totally agree. I want to jump in here on the 356. I have Dr. Davis, and going to the labs every Tuesday night and spending an hour with the kids, it really opens your eyes to a different perspective of how these kids go through their day-to-day lives. And doing some activities with them, and especially in other classes like adventure activities. When you have to, do a task blindfolded, it opens your eyes to say, hey, this is how some of the kids have to go through their day-to-day lives, and it makes you a bit more sensitive on the topic.
Yeah, and Ryan, even to go off that, like when you're injured, you hurt your ankle or anything, like there's people out here that don't have a leg. There's people in here in wheelchairs who can't use their legs. Like, these are things that we have to learn to adjust with in our everyday lives, and I feel like as teachers, making sure that students realize these things are really important.
Right, and going off of that, I read somewhere, but I can't remember where I read it from, but it was talking about how come in PE classes the disabled students have to learn how to play non-disabled games, and how come we don't open up eyes of able-bodied participants learning how to navigate PE activities as a disabled person would. And I thought that really opened up my eyes to that.
And I think inclusive ed is the perfect class that we take at Cortland that really helps you adapt to that, because you're doing everything that people that aren't able are doing. So we're playing wheelchair games, and we're playing sports that we don't really normally play.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with what everyone's saying. I've been working with kids for well over maybe like 8 years now, and no matter they just want to be included, and them being included, especially in those adapted classes, you can really tell that when they're not included, they're so down on themselves, and when you have them in the activities as everyone else, even if you have to make it a little different, they really just enjoy it, and they need it in their lives. It's really important for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the biggest thing is just making lessons that are catered to them and what they like. Like during 356, for example, there was a kid that loved baseball, so he didn't want to play any games. He didn't want to do anything I wanted to do. But one day I took hula hoops and I made different targets at different sizes, and I challenged him and was like, you can't make it in the small hula hoop. You can't make it in the big one. And it gave him an opportunity to show himself, and he loved that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, in those classes when we present those games and when they play them, I think part of the reason why all of us are going to become a PE teacher is to see the joy on their faces and giving them the same opportunities that an able-bodied student would. And I think it's great when everybody can come together and be able to play activities like that and really enjoy it. Also, I want to touch on the thing that Cortland also does really well is they prepare us to have modifications and different lesson plans that we can put in place, not just for the able-bodied students, but for everyone.
I'm going to butt in here. I think that if we look at a more broad topic, society definitely has a huge role and paints a picture on the way people see diversity and inclusion. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that a big proponent of that is social media. And, as kids get older, they have access to social media a little bit more than we did. And social media and the news outlets, they can all paint a positive or a negative picture of diversity and inclusion, which it could be a good and a bad thing.
I'll definitely say it's definitely, especially in society and just in general, it's definitely not talked enough, where it's not broadcast anywhere, it's not on the media anywhere. You never even think about it, even before even becoming an education major, how much inclusion is important for being a physical education major or just education in general, because it's never talked about. You don't talk about it in high school. You don't talk about it in middle school. You don't even think about it until Cortland, it not forces you, but you take these classes and it paints a picture in your mind of why we need it.
And
right,
like
and a lot of the time, if you aren't in education where you are going to be teaching and around these like individuals, you don't really learn about it as much, and you don't know that they actually struggle the way they do.
And I feel that social media plays a terrible role in today's society.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Sorry about that. Stumbled on my words there. What I wanted to say was, back to what you guys were saying about coming to Cortland. Before I was here, it's not really at the forefront of your mind of thinking about these things of diversity and inclusion. So you can imagine, the everyday person going through life. They're not really thinking about it, and it's not really bringing. It's not really bringing any attention to the topic. And I think that's where social media needs to come into play. Ra, what you said, how it's negative, it needs to start going in the positive direction.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, and now Paige, you want to wrap it up?
Well, that's all the time we have for today. It's clear that diversity and inclusion are crucial for the success of students in grades 6 through 12, and that both schools and students have an important role to play.
That's right. Whether it's through training, creating sport environments, or encouraging student leadership, there's so many ways we can work together to make sure every student feels like they belong,
Absolutely, Christian. I couldn't agree more. When we create inclusive schools, we're not just improving education, we're helping students grow into more empathetic, understanding, and empowered individuals.
Yeah, absolutely, everybody. Well, thanks for listening to the Dni Podcast. Let's all continue to advocate for diversity and inclusion in our schools and communities. Until next time.